The world has turned into a dry wasteland with no rain for 10 years. It's completely dry and people can't get any water. The town, Oregon, now looks like an empty ghost town. Kendall is looking out into the desert with a telescope. She's nervous and quiet as she goes into her barn to grab a jar of water from a mechanical well. She also gets some grains into her bag and heads in. Dean was working on some designs when Kendall comes in. She puts the jar on the roof and opens a secret door to the attic, then climbs out into the desert. She finds a skeleton and heads past it. Looking through her telescope again, she sees that there's no one, so Kendall slowly creeps to the house and grabs a jar. She puts it back with some water and then runs back. She's at a hangar with a small plane, and she tries to put a distributor cap in it, but it was the wrong one. That night, she tells Dean about the disruptor cap, and he tells her that they'll find another one. She gets on the radio, and people were talking on it till she falls asleep. Something wakes her up, and Dean tells her to be quiet. She grabs her shotgun and waits for the person to come upstairs. The two people walk away thinking that there's nothing there, and Kendall gets more water, and on her way in, someone grabs her hand, and it's a woman, Sky, asking for water. Kendall gives her water and a jacket, telling her she can rest here for a bit. Sky says that she's going to see her sister, and all of a sudden, they hear a gunshot. Kendall spots two people executing others, and Sky tells Kendall that they're not safe here because of the hunters. She tells Sky to go north and gives her a knife. Kendall was sitting outside when Gabriel walks up to her and offers water, and she smiles and he sits down, and they talk about Dean who is sick, and they also talk about the past. He tells her about a wreck, so she decides to go, but not with Gabriel. She sneaks into a fence and spots two people filling up a tank with water. A truck came by, so she had to hide. The truck then goes into the compound and drops off more water. When she heads home, it's nighttime, and they talk about where to go on the globe. She tells them about what it might be like when they finally land the plane somewhere where there's plenty of water. She lights a torch and listens to the radio of someone crying for help. She decides to pack up and go, and Dean tells her not to go, but she's made up her mind. Outside in the dark, Kendall sees a light in a house, so she heads that way and she spots two men, but someone shoots them down. It's Marauders, Carson's crew, already caught the people that she came out to rescue. So Kendall hides inside the house as the whole crew comes in. She listens as Carson forces the people to call on the radio. He then goes on to shoot one of them. The woman inside was crying as Brooke puts a machete to her back. They give the woman water but end up killing her anyway, and Kendall has to hide again to not get caught by the Marauders. She stays quiet as one of them walks away, and Carson wants to hunt down everyone in the desert, but they find Kendall as she runs out to safety. The next morning, Kendall was walking in the desert when she finds a broken down truck, and she opens the hood and collects the distributor cap and matches it to Dean's drawing. But when she tries it, it doesn't fit. She walks to Albie at the door, trying to convince him to come along with them, but he thinks that he's safe where he is alone. She sneaks back home and takes a look at the water pump, and it's still pumping water, but barely. She walks inside and finds an old ledger, and this is an orphanage, and Kendall and Dean with her sister Pia were orphans there. That night, Dean tells her to leave alone because they're dying without enough water, and she exclaims that she will not leave him behind as they sleep next to him. Kendall then hears someone requesting Carson for water from Breck Farm, so she decides to go. On her way to the farm, Kendall finds her old jar, but when she keeps walking till she spots someone on the ground, it was Sky, and she's dead from a lack of water. So Kendall takes back her knife and walks past her. Kendall spots the birches burying a dead person. She walks over there, and Grace tells her that the well is now dry, so she puts a katana down on the body, and Gabriel asks Kendall to come with his family to Carson. Kendall still thinks that there's more water to be found up north, and Grace offers a little bit of water left, but Kendall was interested in the plane that they had, but Gabriel tells her that it went down over the pumping field. As the Birches gathered their weapons, Carson and his crew show up. Kendall chooses to hide again, looking from inside, and Brooke gives them some water, and the priest says a prayer, and Carson shoots them all instantly except Gabriel. When Carson asks Gabriel if there was anyone else inside, he tells them that there's one more. Kendall now sees Carson telling his daughter that this land is now their own. The Marauders are looking for Kendall when they spot something on the machine. They walk inside and set down a gas canister to smoke out whatever is inside, and that's when a man runs out coughing. Carson asks Gabriel again, and he confirms that that's the last one, and Kendall sneaks out of the back and runs away as fast as she can until she runs into a Marauder. She manages to get a gun on him, but he tackles her and drags her away until she hits him with her axe and manages to shoot him. She then takes her axe and walks away and heads back home. Before heading home, she goes over to check on Albie, and he walks out with an empty jar, letting her know that he's safe. Kendall was checking the pump, but the water has dried up now, and she heads inside to give Dean some water and tells him the pump is slow but okay. He's figured out why the pump is failing, as Carson is using a lot of pumps to drain all the water from the ground. He wants to call Carson, but she tells him that Carson is the one killing everyone. The next day, Dean and Kendall were having some old peaches in a can, and they go over to Pia's grave to say goodbye before they pack up and leave. Dean then tells her to burn his body once he dies, and to go to his uncle's place, and she promises to do it, so she goes back inside and she sets Dean down and heads out. Kendall spots a Marauder and quickly jumps back before he sees her, and she hides behind a wall as he steps inside. She doesn't see him walk behind her, and she goes over to pick up the peaches from earlier. Carson's priest was talking to try and guilt Kendall into walking out, saying that they bring mercy. When no one comes out, Carson tells them to search and gas the house. They then search it the same way with Kendall upstairs. She quietly walks until a floorboard makes too much noise, and they hear it, so she goes inside with Dean. They both wear aluminum foils to mask themselves from the heat sensors, and Kendall looks outside to find Carson, so she signals to Dean to put the gas masks on, and they both do. And we see them holding each other as the gas comes in. Brooke was outside and finds a cap. They put on a sign on the door and leave, but not before Brooke tastes the peach on the cap. She puts it in her pocket and leaves, still being suspicious. Back inside, both Kendall and Dean are fine, but Dean was in pretty bad shape. Kendall goes outside to get him water, and the pump was working, so she brings it back and he has a drink. Kendall goes back out to the compound and she sees the Marauders walking around, but there are too many of them, so she decides to head back. She finds a skeleton on her way back and doesn't spot the Marauder behind her. He drags her away, but she hits him with her axe and he lets a shot off which alerts the others. And so at this point, she shoots him dead and walks away. She gets to Albie, but he's not there, and she walks around to find him, and he was hidden under a tractor. He's been tracking them and tells Kendall to wait for dark and to leave, and he tells her to not come back, but she promises to take them out of this place, but promises that it doesn't mean anything to Albie. Dean was asleep when Kendall came back. She checks in case he had died, but he was alive, and Kendall spots 3 vagrants headed her way, so she runs back upstairs and tells Dean. She's sure that they'll leave once they find nothing, and Dean wants to help them, so she hands him his gun and goes downstairs. She sees the woman is doing terribly, and one man checks the pump, but it was empty. They were trying to decide on what to do when Kendall slowly walks out with her gun, and they tell her that they mean no harm, and they tell her that Carson hid their farm and they were the only ones to survive. She throws them a flask of water and they drink, and they thank her and offer her to come along, but she refuses, telling them to be on their way. She tells Dean about them, and he knows she's been giving him her water for a week, so she confesses that the pump had been dry for 2 days. They only have a week's worth of water, and she wants to get the distributor cap from the wreck at the compound, but it's very dangerous. Dean then suggests going in through the waste oil draining using fire. so she shoots a small pack set on fire across the fence, starting a fire inside. She uses the distraction to get the distributor cap from the car and sneaks back out, and on her way back she checks if the cap matches the drawing, and it does, so she tells Dean the good news. She packs up, preparing to leave, and gives him a flask and then a kiss. She smiled for the first time and she couldn't stop. When she got up from the pump, Judas comes up behind her and hits her in the head, shattering the jar of water. The three vagrants tie her up, and as the lady was about to shoot her, and he shoots two of them, and Judas tries to track him down, but Dean shoots him as well. He gets up and goes over to untie her, but she spots Carson and his crew coming. She tells Dean to run, but he picks her up and hides her in a car, and he tells her to not come back for him as he hobbles away. Carson and his crew were almost there as Dean slowly limps toward the door. Brooke catches him with her gun and he stands by the wall, and Kendall was watching all of this unfold from the back seat of the car. Carson asks him about the others and he tells them that they're dead, and the priest tells him to confess, so Dean says he killed everyone. Carson likes that Dean is a fighter and tells Brooke to go look around. Carson explains that the water in the land now belongs to him. Brooke says the house is empty, so he tells her to check the barn. Kendall was in there trying to cut herself free as Brooke walks toward the barn. Dean shoots the marauder, and the priest and Carson both point their guns at Dean, now as he drops his gun. Carson and Brooke then shoot Dean as Kendall was still in the barn, as she has her heart broken by the sight. The priest then shoots the wounded marauder, then Carson notices something must be in the barn that Dean was trying to protect. Kendall cuts herself loose as Carson walks over to the barn, so she hides herself under a blanket, so Carson walked away. They found a flask of water, but Carson dumps it out into the ground like it means nothing to him. They continued searching the barn and find the pump that stored grain, and Kendall gets her knife ready because they are all so close to her. Brooke checks herself in the mirror of the car and she tells her dad to move to the next farm, and they leave the priest to mark the barn. The next day, Kendall wakes up in the car, steps out slowly, and runs away in a hurry, trying to get away while she still hurts, but there was too much heat and the lack of water was finally starting to get to her. She finally finds some water and drinks it, and she gets to the birch grave and finds the katana still buried with the body. She takes it and goes off to find Carson and his crew, and she finds the priest sitting on the porch eating her peaches. Kendall sneaks in through the barn with no one seeing her, and she pulls out the sword and slashes the priest's neck, instantly killing him. She then picks up her gun and goes around, and she shoots two marauders and hits one with her gun, and one of them was Gabriel. Later on, she finds Dean still at the same spot, and she drags his body inside the house and sets it on fire, just as he wished she would do. The next morning, Kendall puts the distributor cap into the plane and connects it to everything, and she calls out to Albie and looks for him. She sees that Carson has gotten him as well, so she heads to the compound. She sees Brooke walking with Albie, but she couldn't find a way inside. She throws her weapon over the fence and uses the dirt oil drain to get inside, covered in black oil. Kendall runs through the empty compound looking for Albie, and she takes down multiple guards and tells Albie to hide. She shoots Carson in the hand and Brooke in the shoulder. Carson was impressed by her and how strong she was, and he gives the valley to his daughter and grabs a machete to fight Kendall, but Kendall takes him down too. And now it was Brooke's turn, and they fight with their blades, and Brooke gets the upper hand until Kendall finds a way to knock her down and uses the sword to finish her off. And finally, Kendall and Albie walk away from the compound together. She tells Albie that Dean will stay behind not to break his heart, and they both get into the plane and it finally starts.